Thank you guys for coming. So I'll just start right away. I would like to start with a question to both of you. If you could generally explain what your company does and how your companies are helping people and machines work together more efficiently, that would be great. Let's start with you, Mariana.
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Mariana Vasconcelos, co-founder and CEO at Agrosmart. We leverage climate solutions across the food systems. So we have 3 pillars. First, focus on the farmers, where we support 100,000 farmers with data so they become more climate resilient and adopt good practices. We have a second pillar, focus on corporations, where we help them to understand their impact and their scope 3, deforestation, carbon, water usage in their supply chain, and third, around climate risk, where we integrate data with finance. And the way we facilitate interactions with humans and machines, it all starts with the IoT. So it's like we have to have data, right? So we deploy sensors in the field to collect real-time climate data, weather stations, digital rain gauges, soil sensors. And based off that, we build models to help farmers to make decisions. So it starts first descriptive, like what's going on now, to the past, like why did this happen, what happened? Predictive, so like is it gonna rain? Is there a risk of disease? Is the climate going to affect my yield somehow? And prescriptive, where we help them to make the decision, like how much should I irrigate? When should I spray? Which seed should I choose? So we make it simpler for processing all of data by using AI. So like as human beings, for example, just in one rain sensor, we read more than 17,000 times the data. So a human would have to go there all the time to pick up the data. Like we can't have that same amount of data. And then when we have to correlate so many different kinds of information, we also can't do it. So then we use the algorithms to help analyze all of that information and help the farmers to get to the decision faster. And that's delivered in different interface. That can be an analytics with a lot of graphs and dashboards, but it can also be just a WhatsApp message telling farmers what to do with emojis to support those that can't really read.
Thank you. Maya, if you could, the same question also.
Sure. My name is Maya Pindeus. I'm the CEO and founder of Humanizing Autonomy. We focus on people, really. So human-machine interactions from the perspective of people. The question is, how can we understand, infer, and interpret human behavior so that a machine knows exactly how to interact with us as people? So that means if you think about a machine, right, probably the most dangerous machines we encounter every day all the time, and we sit in them multiple times a day, which are cars, right? We cross the street, we cross cars, we take cabs, etc. And if we start thinking about how could those machines actually acknowledge us, understand our behavior, know when to provide a certain service to us, but also increase our safety, understand when to and how to prevent accidents. So human-machine interactions from our perspective is how much can we understand about human behavior and people in context, because context is incredibly important, so that we can teach a machine to behave accordingly. And that is a challenge that goes from safety, of course, because if we look at accident rates, road accidents in urban environments, it's a massive, massive problem across all over the world. But it's also a user experience problem, if we think about that. So a machine can be a car, as we said, it can be a street light, it can be a self-checkout machine in a supermarket, it can be your Alexa, your smart home device, smart fridge, and so on. So we have machines everywhere all the time, and very often we don't realize it. And those machines are trying to personalize for us, create recommendations, create a more pleasant experience. They will only be able to do that if they actually understand us as people and how we behave, and take just the right amount of information to create a better experience for us. And there is a lot to do here. If you think at human-machine interactions, first of all, you look at perceiving space, understanding where a machine is placed, and understanding what people are, where people are, objects, etc. And then the most complex pieces, teaching them to think. And that's what we focus on.
Thank you so much, guys. So Mariana, I wanted to ask you, how can machine learning and technology improve the agricultural process? If you could go in depth about it.
Yeah, so agriculture is undergoing a great transition. We need to increase up to 70% of food production to feed almost 10 billion people by 2050. We are fighting several issues at the same time. So there is climate change that is affecting the way farmers perceive reality and make decisions. It's changing the dynamics and their knowledge. So they need to learn all the time faster so they can adapt. And that influences water availability, land availability, and consumers more and more want information on where food comes from, how is it being produced, is it protecting the environment, are the social workers being treated correctly in the supply chain. So farmers need data, and it always starts with data. Like the amount of data in agriculture and about the environment is still very low. And there is no machine learning, no AI if there is no data. So we still in agriculture are undergoing to the digitalization process, changing the manual data collection, deploying the sensors, the machines, the IoT piece in the field so we can have more and more data. Then at some stages and some companies, they already have a good data set that they can start training. First for specific models. So I gave some examples, like is it gonna rain? That's a weather forecast model that includes machine learning. We have disease detection through satellite imagery. That's like a lot of deep learning models in there. And the evolution where it's going is generative AI. So when we look to the large language models, the LLMs, they have a great power to help orchestrate other specific models. So when we have a very complex problem, which is like you arrive in a farm and climate is changing and everything is changing, like what do I do? What should I sow here specifically considering the soil, the microclimate, the price in the market, everything else. So the LLM models could help us to solve those more complex by orchestrating several specific models at once and making interface easier. So like that interaction, focus on the human is so important. So it will support a lot that personalization of response to each farmer, to each reality. And taking one step further, then we have robotics. Like agriculture is an open field for automating that work. So right, we have autonomous tractors, we have variable rate spraying, sowing of seeds. So we implement precision ag as its most potential. So I think we will have the intersection and collaboration of all of these tools, starting with having data first, and then seeing this evolution of the models and automation on the robotic side.
Thank you. So Maya, I took a look at your site, and I know there's a great concern about how ethical AI is. So I wanted to ask you, how can we ensure that AI and automation works to the benefit of humanity and not against us? What are the risks that we are facing here with this transformation?
Well, I mean, like, let's start with the data, because you mentioned, we collect all this data, and it's critical to train, to deploy AI, right? But the first thing is to make sure that data is unbiased, that we create data, we collect data that represents society equally, that represents an equal distribution, and also understands its limitations. So yes, we're talking about large data sets here, but I would advocate for actually very specific, carefully curated data sets, so you actually know what feeds into a decision of the system. The second one is privacy, of course, knowing what technologies to need to create for which use case. I think facial recognition is a really interesting example because it's kind of everywhere, but for many applications you actually don't need it. It's just being done as well because you can monetize it. So it's actually building technology specifically for the use case and specifically for the benefit is incredibly important. And then comes the ethics piece, right? Creating interpretable AI. And interpretable AI means that you need to understand the decision-making process of a system. There again, large data sets or large language models or large visual models, we're a visual AI company, have a lot of limitations because you don't really understand what's in the black box. And there's been a big movement these days to go away from deep learning and from black box approaches because it's really difficult for customers to integrate and to trust, for consumers to trust, and ultimately AI needs to be about trust, because otherwise we will not be able to want to accept it. and instead start working with smaller defined data sets with modular architectures, where each module is interpretable, each module is inferable, and those are the things. And then it comes to applications, right? So there's certain things where I think it's the creator's responsibility what to do and what not to do. And this is like the final part, right? Being sure that to only build applications that benefit AI. There's some exciting regulation going on in the EU AI Act, for instance, where you actually start classifying a different risk level of AI. Applications that we should stay away from, and applications would actually be for good and for people.
Fascinating. Talking about good for people, here in Brazil, we have a huge concern involving the origin of the agricultural produce that we do. Mariana, how do we make sure that they are being produced ethically and in a sustainable way? Can technology help track this?
Yeah, well, it all goes back to data. So we need to have data to know how and where it's being produced. So there is a concept that is growing a lot within carbon markets, but it can actually be applied to everything. That's called MRV, monitor, report, and verify. So for us to know where food is coming from, to be sure it's sustainable produced, we need to monitor. So IoT helps, satellite imagery helps, farmers' interaction with apps and information sharing helps. Reports, like how do we organize all of that information together and talk to regulation and understand what are the standards where we need to evaluate and say something is good or bad. And verify means like interacting with other stakeholders, other data sources through APIs to know like, is it telling the truth? How do I have other data points that can cross-check that information? So definitely it does, and then we have like other piece of technology that we will also grow within that, which is blockchain. So like to ensure the visibility and the reliability on the data, but certainly, and that's something that is growing very fast, but also needs regulation. Just like all this space, it is still something very new that we need to understand what is right, what is wrong, how to do it, how do we ensure all of that?
Yeah, agriculture is basically the most traditional industry that there is, but I wanted to ask you, Maya, what other traditional industries can benefit from automation? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So if we look at the city, right, we have a lot of traditional industries there. Automotive industry as the first phase. Infrastructure, traffic infrastructure, for instance. Logistics, supply chain, trucking, long-haul trucking, fulfillment centers, construction. So that's a whole point. And I'll give you a couple of examples of like how this is being applied. For instance, in the automotive industry, again, in cities that are growing exponentially, more and more people live there, and more different, traffic forms and modes are being implemented. So what we look in there is to understand and leverage any video camera stream to be able to see what is the intention, for instance, to cross the path of a vehicle. Could there be a likely risk? What would be the things monitored around blind spots in trucks? Trucking is another heavily regulated industry with a large accident base, particularly around blind spots. So can you use visual AI to be able to predict if a cyclist actually going to come and cross and potentially have an accident? So that's very traditional industries, but that are keen for new adoptions of technology because they have a really clear problem. First, liabilities and accidents, and second, it's also about operations and making operations smoother. Looking inside at the passenger, the driver's seat, right? How can we help combat driver fatigue, for instance, make drivers more efficient and just more careful as well. Then looking at construction sites, for instance, another really, really interesting one. Can we monitor how workers interact with heavy machinery, like forklifts, etc., on sites? Can we understand what is a risk for slip, strips, and falls? Another big problem where industry is really, really keen on adoption to see, can we prevent accidents? Can we make a safer workplace? Again, the interaction with actual machinery, right? Like in fulfillment centers where people are actually working hand in hand with machines all the time. Can we create an environment where on one hand we increase the efficiency to make it better and smoother and faster, so operations, but can we also increase safety and with that workplace environment, etc. So those are I think the key traditional industries we're really, really keen on adoption these days.
Thank you. Mariana, I can't imagine it is easy to get farmers to adopt these kind of technologies in the field. Can you talk a little bit about the challenges of doing that, of like bringing this type of advanced tech to people that sometimes are not used to it?
Sure. Advancing technologies in that industry starts with a big problem on infrastructure and connectivity. So how are we going to collect data in the field if there is no internet? Still today, only 27% of the farms in Brazil have internet. And it's not always of the best quality, so not all of the use cases can benefit from that. And it's not an issue of technology. It's not about being Sigfox, LoRa, narrowband IoT, satellite connectivity, 5G. It's about the business model. Because there is less people. And even though we all dream, like with the IoT world full of sensors, like we are still on the way to that. So who pays for the bill? Who pays for the infrastructure? Is it the government? Is it the private sector? Is it the farmer? So we still didn't come to terms on how do we split that cost to invest in infrastructure. Second piece is education. And there is the piece of literacy, digital inclusion. How do they use their phones? How do you access an app? How do you read it? But also about awareness. I think Maya mentioned something about trust, right? And that's a big challenge. When we started deploying sensors in the field, farmers wouldn't trust, like, are you sure that I don't have to go there anymore? But what if it fails? Like, what if the information you give me is wrong? And many times, like, we would put, for example, a digital rain gauge, which is a rain sensor, and they would put a plastic bottle by the side to say, you see, I can't trust it. It's wrong. And then we would have to explain, like, no, your bottle is wrong, because the bottle has no standard. Like, anyone manufactures a bottle in a different way, in different sizes. You can't really trust that data. The other one is the trustworthy. So we are still building on that. Like, how do we create trust with transparency, with good communication, with interpretation, where it's not a black box, that farmers understand the logic and they trust that data? And last is financing. So in agriculture, for example, the majority of farmers, they rely on credit to buy their seeds, their fertilizers, they sow, they harvest, and that's it. There is no money left to invest. And buying a machine, buying a sensor, hiring a software, it costs. So we need more resource allocation, both public and private sector, bringing financing so farmers can invest in the fourth industrial revolution. It happened in the industry, it has to happen in every sector. If there is no credit, there is no way we are going to implement all of that technology.
Thank you. Maya, what are you most excited about in the near future when it comes to machine learning, AI, and automation?
Well, multiple things. I think there's amazing potential, but there's a lot of education to be done. So, Mariana, you mentioned education when it comes to adopting new technologies and adopting things that would make life more, I guess, more efficient, right, for farmers in the agriculture space. But I think there's a general question about education when it comes to automation and AI. I'm amazed by the public discourse that has happened with, ChatGPT and so on. But I think it's only the start. People to actually understand the potential, the risks, the limitation, come together on the table to also decide where should it be applied, where should it not be applied. So I think there's a big education piece where, we all have to contribute and we all have to really talk about it. So that excites me, but also it has to happen. The other thing is to start talking about AI more focused as a tool that can be applied in different industries, in different segments, in different parts of our daily life to make our processes better, but not something that is everywhere and will take over. So I think we need a bit more of a focused discussion, because I do believe in AI and automation as a assistance, almost like a companionship. And we see this in, I think smart home is a great example where you do have devices that are fun, right, and make life a bit better, or shopping, retail, etc. But if we can have certain defined applications of AI that are proven and truly make everyday life more efficient, more scalable, more pleasant, then I think that's a success and true excitement. But I think there's a way to go, and we actually need to first have this discourse, have the fascination for generative AI and everything that's going on, and then start focusing down again and saying, well, where do we want to apply this? Regulation will help, but also just awareness and education, I think.
Thank you both. Thank you for your time. Thank you guys for taking the time to listen.